Guessing the joke does not get you credit towards earning a mug.
Nope.
No, they're completely separate.
They're totally separate things that we have going on here. Oh, here we are live. Welcome, everybody. It is the 27th of March. This is the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We will go around the room and introduce ourselves, including our guests. I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Kaplan from St. John Gray, Company, Essex.
Richard Bailey, Laval 2.
Mara Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2. Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Butner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Lars Filio, Wyndham 2. Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
John?
Oh, good morning. John Rayman from Ottersburg, Maine, Barton. Good morning.
I'm Matt Sorensen, legislative intern for Lisa Hackett.
Great.
Those with Heath Lee and I public affairs for GMP.
For GMP. All righty. For the record.
I'm TJ Poor. I'm the Director of Planning at the Public Service Department.
I'm Claire McElvany. I'm our Data and Equity Policy Manager on TJ's team.
Great. Thanks for being here. We have turned our attention to solar. So we are here to hear from you guys on your Act 179 of 2024 report. It's posted on our website and it's been there for a while. But we have not, I don't believe, taken any kind of sustained testimony on it. So here we are, starting with the report.
And hopefully I'll be able to share. Soon. Great. Oh, there we are. Yeah, so we've prepared a couple of slides. We also printed out copies of the report just for easy reference. And then the last page of that kind of deck of paper has the one-page overview of the report as a whole, in addition to the slides that we'll run through today. So, and TJ and I are going to tag team a little bit in terms of slides, but wanted to give you sort of a quick overview of the report. Today, we're primarily going to focus on talking about the 4 recommendations that came out of the process to create the report and be responsive to the requirements in Act 179. And sort of as an overview, we have those 4 recommendations up here. So after the process, which I'll run through in a minute, we kind of coalesced around this suite of recommendations. One, to establish a renewable energy for communities program as kind of the primary successor program to the group net metering. 2, to implement renewable energy policy cost containment mechanisms to help pay for that program. So we see sort of recommendation 1 is working to deliver more equitable access to solar and community renewables generally. And then the second recommendation is one way to help mitigate any inequitable burdens that may result from implementing a new program. And then we had our sort of suite of recommendations, 2 additional. 1 focused on initiating a proceeding to review and modernize net metering holistically, also considering other potential distributed generation programs for Vermont as a way to sort of think about complementary pathways to continue to support community renewables and distributed generation more broadly. And then a recommendation which was responsive to some of the requirements, which is simply kind of commenting on renewable energy procurement programs as not the appropriate mechanism to support electrification. So that's sort of our agenda for today, really focusing on those first 2, but of course, happy to take questions as we go through.
If I could add,
Yeah.
one thing, just those first 2 recommendations are materialized in a portion of the bill that's before you in H289. So the Renewable Energy for Communities program and cost containment mechanisms are both included in that bill. And then backing up a second, I just should have done this at the outset, but I wanted to introduce Claire a little more to those of you who don't know her.
Launched right in.
Yeah, I thought maybe you were going to do that, but Claire's been with the department for about 5 years now and has really upped our game in terms of public engagement, but not only that, but how we think through the processes that we have and the programs that we put forth in terms of the benefits and burdens that those programs really put on Vermonters and or give to Vermonters. And that comes from, through both, she had a different role before this, but then our engagement that we did for the renewable energy standard prior to last year, including designing that process and then implementing it, and then also with this report. Last year, when I testified on this portion of the report, I suggested that we might not, it was only 6 months to do this report, and I suggested that that might be reflected in the quality of the report. And then we went ahead and had Claire be the lead of the report. And so it is an excellent report. And so I just want to, Claire's got a breadth of experience from, when she started and doing some power supply work. She was a senior policy analyst through to now doing a lot of our equity and data work. And so I just wanted to give you that background in terms of who is leading this project and give some props to you at the risk of embarrassing you.
Yes. Rep. Sibelia, we already have a question.
No question. Just having participated in some of this process, and I definitely communicated this, I think, to you, Director Ford. It was, I agree. These public processes were great, accessible. They were easy to follow and understand. And so really important. So thank you very much.
Rep. Kleppner.
And I do have an echo question. Number 4, renewable energy procurement programs are not the appropriate mechanisms for electrification programs. I'm not sure I understand what that means. Does that mean renewable energy procurement programs? Does that mean things like the RES?
Well, we will, I think, hopefully answer your question as we go. I have a couple slides that just cover sort of the background of what we were asked to do with this report, which required us to look at a successor program to group net metering that would achieve a wide variety of objectives, like reducing energy burden. Well, I'm preempting my slides, so maybe I'll just go there.
Okay.
I was going to say,
yeah.
I think, I thought that was sort of like the
Yeah.
table of contents, and now we're going to talk about all the things, right? Okay.
So yeah, we'll hopefully address your question as we go, and if not, we can definitely come
We
back.
shall return.
So I've sort of started talking through this, but the Act 179 report really came from the fact that Act 179 created a sunset for the group net metering program and tasked the department with creating this report that would seek to strive to create a successor program with a variety of different objectives, which I just started talking through, whether that was reducing operating costs, reducing resident energy burdens, encouraging electrification and decarbonization of buildings, and then really focusing on, in particular, some of the needs of the affordable housing and manufactured home communities, which we'll talk about sort of the focus of the recommendations that we have as we go. But there were 5 distinct requirements in the law, which I'm not going to read through. I have them on the slide as just a reference for the committee. But we really felt they fell into 2 buckets. 2 of the requirements really focused in on that component of developing a successor program for group net metering. So thinking about how we create the access that group net metering was really affording communities like affordable housing and manufactured home communities, thinking about how a program would impact Vermont's frontline and impacted communities. And we addressed those 2 requirements primarily through a meeting series, which I'll touch on in a minute. And then 3 other requirements, what I broadly characterize as like setting the scene of what programs currently exist to support income eligible customers in Vermont, progress affordable housing has made so far in connecting their communities with solar and barriers they faced, and looking at the landscape of federal funding and other funding sources that are available. And we just heard from Melissa Bailey about Solar for All and some other of those sources. And of course, this report did come out prior to the change in the administration, so it doesn't necessarily capture the uncertainty that is there now.
I have a, did you have your hand up?
I did not, sure.
I have a question. This is so basic. I'm sorry, I often ask the most basic questions. Could you please help me understand, because I get lost in the lingo sometimes. Virtual net metering, group net metering, offsite net metering. Same thing. And then community solar. Could you please just, which of those things are the same and which are different? And can you just help me with that? Because there are a lot of different phrases get tossed around, and I want to make sure that if we're going to dive into this as a committee, that we know exactly what we're doing and what we are not doing, so that we don't spend weeks wandering around.
Yeah, so well, I can take a first step. You guys can correct me if not to add anything, but I'd say in the meeting series we've used virtual net metering and group net metering, sort of the same terminology. So the ability to, I think group net metering is the ability to have multiple off-takers from one system, and then the sort of off-site pieces that those off-takers can be in part sort of separate from the array that they're benefiting from. That doesn't, so you could have, I think, different permutations of what that looks like. We heard from SEVCA, which is one of the community action agencies, where they have an array on their roof, and then the off-takers are income eligible households in their service territory. But you could also have, as it sort of originally designed, someone who has an array on their roof and are sharing some of the credits, as I understand it. So what Act 179 did was it removed the ability to have that off-site component. So like the type of program that the array on SEVCA's building runs would no longer be allowable, because the off-takers from that site are separate. But you could still have sort of so I'll stop there.
So virtual and offsite are the same,
As I understand it.
and group is the same.
Mostly, except that you can, if your group is all adjacent to one another, then you can still have a group. And so that's kind of the primary exception to that, or difference, I think, is that you can still group 3 buildings next to each other, or even just 2, if they're adjacent to each other, into have one system, provide power for both of those, or provide net billing for both of those.
Yeah.
And is that true for one building with multiple units? Do a rooftop?
Well, that's
net metering.
Yes,
If they
yeah.
each had individual.
A lot of those are master metered, so it'd still just be one, but if they're separately metered, that would be there for that.
Seems like there's an implication that there's an off-taker, a load associated with the same parcel, the same site.
Or adjacent to, yes, yeah,
Or adjacent to.
yes.
And there's, sorry.
So just to, okay, so group can be, that is multiple people participating in the benefits of a single array, which could either be on site, you got 2 houses, it's right there, or offsite, which we call virtual or offsite, which I just called it. So group, multiple people, same array, right there, or somewhere else, virtual offsite.
Yeah.
Did I get that?
Yeah.
Community now?
So I would say community solar or community renewables, if we're going broader than solar, is sort of a broader overarching type of program. We talk about in the report a little bit how group net metering has been the primary venue for many communities to develop a community solar array, but it could look different ways. For example, Vermont Electric Co-op has a community solar program that they run themselves, and their members can sort of subscribe. And so that's a much larger array that can support a much larger number of participants in the community solar. So it's just a broader, I think, distinction of ways to capture similar types of programs.
Okay, so in this report, you were very specifically tasked with coming up with a successor program for group net metering.
Yes. And we, well, and I'll say we took a pretty broad view at what that could look like. We're not getting into the details of sort of the different programs we looked at here, but we tried to take a step back and say, like, what could a different permutation of a community solar program, or community renewables, which is really what we felt like we were looking to solve for. Like, how do we encourage access to the benefits of investing in solar in the way that group net metering has? What could those programs look like? So we, in the meeting series, this slide just kind of covers where these 4 recommendations come from. One of which was a 3-part meeting series with a pretty diverse array of partners. Representative Sebelia participated in that. We looked at all different kinds of models. We looked at community solar programs that had been part of what was traditionally group metering. We looked at the utilities type program. We considered the department's renewable energy for communities proposal. So we're looking at sort of a broader ways to get to a successor program.
Okay, within the group category though, we're not going to be talking about single person residential net metering programs. That is not in this.
Yeah.
So there's one thing we can set aside.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's as far as going with all that. That is not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. Onward.
Yeah, so I just teed up. We wanted to just touch briefly on the process. I mentioned the 3-part working meeting series where we invited a group of partners to the table to have conversations about the objectives of a successor program, what current program models exist that we might want to build off of, and then work towards making recommendations. We worked with our distribution utilities and affordable housing developers and Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to do some information requests. And then we also reviewed existing community engagement efforts since we weren't able to conduct engagement specific to this report in the time we had. And then we did have a public comment period to work to refine the final report of the public. So we weren't planning to dive deep into that, but of course I copy that. So before I get into the 4 recommendations, in thinking about what a group net metering successor program did distill sort of 4 guiding principles that a successor program writ large would work to build off of. And these really came from the conversations we had in that working meeting series, but I think we're also informed by the engagement efforts that we had reviewed and other research we had done. But really, a program should strive to be transparent around the costs and benefits of that program, demonstrating who pays and how and over what time frame. So thinking about what projects are eligible, how they're selected, what the compensation structure is. So really striving for transparency in that structure. Also, programs should strive to be simple, both from the program administrator's perspective, so building off existing programs where possible and helping ensure that the maximum amount of benefit flows to participants directly. Third, flexibility, so that the program could accommodate kind of that breadth of different solutions for how projects could benefit a community, and how they could participate in those projects, and then also strive to minimize costs, both to keep electric rates affordable and ensure that any new program doesn't unintentionally shift burdens or costs onto folks who either can't or choose not to participate. So we'll come back to this in a minute, but just wanted to highlight that this was sort of something we distilled out of those conversations for whatever programming moved forward. So shifting in to the first recommendation was around the development of the Renewable Energy for Communities program, seeking to develop community benefiting renewable energy writ large. So this is a little broader than solar, although of course could encompass community solar specifically. And that would really have 2 primary objectives: creating opportunities to connect communities with least cost renewable energy projects, whether through their design and operation, but also through the flow of benefits, and then to deliver benefits as identified by communities and partners through resources that would be eligible for the utilities to meet their tier 2 requirements under the renewable energy standard. So that is that small scale new, smaller than 5 megawatts in Vermont requirement under the current renewable energy standard. And we intentionally took a broad view in this proposal of thinking about communities and also benefits. I will say when we convened the partners and we're talking through the objectives, the Act 174 set forth for this requirement, there was some interpretation of the statute that this successor program was really intended to focus on affordable housing and manufactured homes specifically. Although there's, I think, also language that suggests a focus kind of more broadly on frontline and impacted communities. And we certainly recognize the need to support affordable housing and manufactured homes, but in coming up with a proposal and through the conversations wanted to also recognize that they're sort of one set of a broader array of communities in Vermont that really need support in this realm, including, for example, low-income Vermonters who haven't attained affordable housing yet. So we in the report do define our definition of frontline and impacted communities specific to this work, and includes low-income Vermonters writ large, schools and municipalities, affordable housing and manufactured home communities.
Sorry, just to be clear. So you said at the outset of this work, there was a little bit of back and forth about whether Act 179 wanted you to focus specifically on manufactured homes and affordable housing versus environmental justice or low income frontline communities writ large. And you settled on the latter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we felt like, yeah, there was space to consider a successor program that could achieve both of those objectives. And I'll just, before moving on, say that we took a similarly broad view of benefits. So certainly thinking about sort of a bill credit that could support a low-income Vermont ratepayer, but also thinking about other benefits these types of projects might deliver, like community resilience, workforce development, lease payments to a landowner, and other benefits like that. So we weren't overly prescriptive in that way. This proposal envisions that projects would actually be evaluated and selected by individual utilities in Vermont through a process I'll describe in a moment, but would be evaluated against a consistent set of criteria. So it would be sort of an even playing field across the state. And that criteria could include a variety of different things that I've listed here. Certainly the cost of the electricity that project would deliver, but also the community support for the project, where it's located, whether it's a preferred site in a regional or town enhanced energy plan, but also things like the generation profile and other benefits. So we weren't prescriptive again. This would be something that we would hope would be determined by the Public Utility Commission during the proceeding to develop the program, but we put forward a number of suggestions. And so the proposal envisions kind of a 3-stage process that would occur periodically to develop community renewables. First, a utility would issue a request for proposals to solicit eligible projects. We envision that this would happen periodically on a predetermined schedule. So, the utilities would know when they are soliciting, but also interested parties would know when those solicitations were going to come out. That could be once a year, twice a year. Again, that would be determined during the proceeding. And then the program would have established cap for how many sort of total megawatts the utility would need to solicit over a time frame. That would be a percentage of their requirement in the renewable energy standard. Again, we weren't prescriptive on this because we didn't have time to do kind of the number crunching that would have needed to go into that, but envision that being determined by the Public Utility Commission. The second, once the RFP kind of phase closes, the utilities would review proposals for projects meeting the requirements, and then evaluate them against that criteria established by the PUC, and then would ultimately select projects to enter into agreements with, and those agreements would detail the benefits that would be flowing from the project and the communities that they would be flowing to. So, and we envision that, again, this process would happen periodically over the term of the program. So again, actually maybe pause there if folks have initial questions.
So this is a sort of utility driven way for them to meet tier two.
Not the whole tier two requirement, it would be a
Portion of it.
percentage of it. So they would still sort of be doing their regular procurements to meet their total tier two obligation, but sort of a carve out of that requirement would be specified for community systems.
And would the PUC have to approve them?
Not the individual projects and the
Okay.
way we've envisioned it, it would be sort of the PUC has a proceeding. And from 2 slides, they have an initial proceeding, they set the parameters for the program, the evaluation criteria that would be used to score projects against, and then the utilities would take it from there in terms of actually issuing the request for proposal and identifying which projects were best fit for both their requirements and the criteria. And we do have, and we put forward draft language for how to enable this, and it includes a component to think about kind of how we would evaluate the success of the program and
Compliance.
and reporting.
So,
Brett Morrow?
well, a couple of reasons to have the utilities kind of manage the process instead of the state is really one. Utilities can design the RFP to procure projects in the areas of the grid that they're most useful, right? And provide the most value to ratepayers. So that's a really critical reason that the state isn't necessarily very good at that. And then also just there is a real administrative burden and cost of the state to run a procurement process like that. The standard offer program did cost the state a significant amount of money, just an administrative cost to run. We get the same benefits of a periodic solicitation that is, a periodically publicly known solicitation with known evaluation criteria without the state running it. And if you talk to the Public Utility Commission, this goes a little beyond my knowledge, but there's a lot of legal issues with the state actually running a procurement program like that kind of bumps into federal regulations on from PURPA, the big energy law from the late 70s. So having it in the utilities hands has some advantages as long as there's that guidance of here are the evaluation criteria, which then the last thing I'll say is that we thought it was really important to have the specifics of that evaluation criteria, which we couldn't get to in a quick 6-month process, be really in a transparent process where people can be on the record in front of the Public Utility Commission saying this is why evaluation criteria X should be a real evaluation criteria. This is why there should be a carve out for affordable housing or whatever community you're talking about. And so and have that process be meet really some of the guiding principles in transparency, and then ultimately it's simplicity.
Brett Morrow, and then
Curious how this would integrate with what we just heard from the Solar for All, like the match program. It seems like there's some overlap in there. Do you want to use?
It's a good question. I think in the next slide we tee up that we propose that this program be established by 2027. That's to give the Public Utility Commission some time to have a process that can have meaningful participation, accounted for the legislative session. But so it would be interesting to see how the timings of the programs lined up. But I think it's possible that, we've talked about, would we in this proposal just be looking for new development, or could it be existing? I think either could potentially qualify, and if new development was going through the match program in terms of funding support, I don't see why it wouldn't also be eligible to participate in this program to then count for a utilities tier 2 requirement and their kind of requirement to support community systems. So
and ultimately lower the cost to ratepayers for the programs. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Brett Campbell?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Jim.
No, not bad.
I don't know if you covered this. Is there an imagined stipulation for the commission to, or maybe I should ask it this way. Would the commission be responsible for deciding or determining the percentage of the utilities tier 2 requirement that they would be required to, each DU would be required to solicit for this program?
Yes, that's what we envisioned. We weren't prescriptive in this report and sort of teed that up as part of the proceeding. Again, as TJ mentioned, where we could have a diverse array of partners who were involved in providing comments and helping determine what was the best fit.
Do you have anything more you could say about that, or is just really just up to the commission to determine?
Sure.
Yeah, I can, so recall, for those of you who were around, we proposed this last year as well, and we did have a proposal in there for the amount. I think it was 80 megawatts over 10 years. And so, but we realized this time around, we didn't really have a good basis for that. And so we didn't, that specific number. So we wanted to leave it open for that technical analysis to have
80 megawatts statewide.
correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just got one part of the discussion last year, so.
Yeah.
Right. That's good, thanks.
So 80 megawatts out of a current peak demand of just over 1,000 megawatts.
Just under 1,000 megawatts, yeah, around 90. So I think the current renewable energy standard is looking to, it depends on how you estimate it, but about 40 megawatts per year of new, if it was all to be met by solar, it'd be 40 megawatts per year, roughly, of new solar. And so for the next, through 2032 anyway. And so just to give you a sense of scale.
Immediate road. So this generation is going to meet the growth in demand.
It would be one portion of the need that's set by the renewable energy standard.
And sorry, and then we can move on. As you have envisioned the program, it's not just solar, right? Did you say that?
Yeah.
Hear that? Okay.
Yeah, so because it's designed to work with the current renewable energy standard,
Right.
we've aligned the eligibility with tier 2, which is not specific to solar. Although,
Okay.
it certainly could be fulfilled all by solar if that's what was proposed.
Okay.
Just clarification, and you said we're doing roughly 40 megawatts of solar a year.
I said that's the estimated requirement under the new version of tier 2 going forward. I have to look at one of the presentations I gave you to give you the exact number, but I think we've been more in the 25 to 30 megawatt range.
Okay.
And then it's been, I think we estimated 40 to 50 actually megawatts per year of new solar required under the new version of the grants.
Okay, and then the 80 that you mentioned that might be applicable under this would be over a period of years.
Correct.
How many years?
We proposed, so last year we proposed that over 10 years.
Okay.
So about 8 megawatts a year.
I'm not holding
that
this-
was that.
I'm not
Yeah,
holding
that's
you to this. I'm just
right.
trying to get a sense of, parameters. That's all right. Good. Thanks.
Hey.
Yeah, well, we touched on a lot of what's on this slide. I think in the report, we lay out why this proposal, TJ mentioned it, it's consistent with proposal we had made previously in the last legislative session based on, the engagement we did to support that process. We then felt, we took a step back with the working group and said, okay, this was, one idea, what are others, but ultimately felt like this proposal really spoke to the 4 guiding principles and the best way out of the examples that we reviewed. It worked with transparently set criteria. It aligns with how we understand utilities are planning to meet tier 2 requirements through regular request for proposals. It allows them to manage the process and innovative solutions to emerge. And then through the competitive request for proposals, it should work to help drive down the cost of the program. And we've also teed up a good amount of this too. We, tasked the Public Utility Commission with actually implementing, the program or establishing the program by rule or order by January 1st of 2027, accounting for, the time to work through the legislative process and then also hold a proceeding that could have meaningful engagement with partners. And we talk in the report about, both key partners who may be helping implement the program, but also Vermonters who may be benefiting from it, and wanting to allow time for that. And then the report, as I think we see up, there's a lot of remaining questions of what would go into this. We've put forward sort of the guardrails and the broad parameters, but there are many of the details that would still need to be figured out, like whether a utility could petition to opt out if they can show they're meeting the requirements through more cost-effective programs, without reducing access. Refining the eligibility criteria, doing some financial modeling to really make sure this is the best fit solution, or if any parameters need to be tweaked, and then also whether or not there should be things like carve outs for specific types of communities, like affordable housing within kind of the broader requirement, or different tranches for different types of programs. So smaller systems versus larger. So more to come on that front. But hopefully we've laid out sort of the broad parameters with that proposal. And that was the last slide on recommendation 1. So pass it off to TJ to get into sort of, that's how we hope to increase equitable access. And TJ is going to talk about how we hope to sort of mitigate any unexpected burdens from new programs.
So minimization of cost was one of the themes, one of the guiding principles. We definitely heard a lot about cost throughout the stakeholder process in a lot of different ways. Cost to electric rates, but also cost to overall kind of making an energy transition as you bring in electrification and renewable energy into a building, kind of that overall operating costs of a building. Talk about that in a second. But we, in developing this proposal, we really wanted to, or writing the report, we wanted to carry through that kind of discussion on costs, that saying, hey, if we're going to deliver more benefits specifically to specific communities, then that is not definitely, but likely to cost more than a utility just procuring power and meeting its obligations without directing it to specific communities. And so we felt that it really important to just talk about cost containment mechanisms. And we feel they're really critical to ensure that, one, non-participating Vermonters, those that aren't in maybe not in an affordable housing community, but maybe they're low income or frontline community, and in another way, that we avoid cost increases for those communities. And then we also want to recognize that electrification policy is really supported by doing what we can to keep electric costs down. So we want to avoid putting upward pressure on costs. So in the report, we came up with several cost containment mechanisms. Now, these mechanisms, you can go ahead.
Can I ask one? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to ask one question before you move on. So as just a reminder to myself, if this is all sort of being envisioned as a tier 2 mechanism, like here's a tier 2 pathway, I am reminding myself out loud that the point of tier 2 is not to procure the cheapest renewable energy, but to spur and promote the development of more in-state renewables.
Correct.
That's the goal we're trying to achieve. We're
Right.
talking about tier 2, and it's not what's the cheapest renewable out there. It is how can we also, as a part of our ROS work, make sure that we're developing more distributed renewable energy within Vermont, which okay.
Right. So
I'm caught up.
So
Thanks.
the next layer to that, though, is that within tier 2 and within Vermont, we can develop, there's a whole range of costs which we can meet tier two at. And there's no, right now, under the law, we want to meet tier two as cost effectively as possible, right? And so that kind of sets the pace. Tier two sets the pace by which in-state renewable energy development happens. And so we could do that with no restrictions. The utility just does it as cost effectively as possible. If we start saying, hey, we want to make sure that we're delivering benefits to specific communities that as a policy matter, then that is starting to move away. We're putting another policy layer on it. We're putting another priority, and that costs may be associated with that. And so that's really where we're getting to here, is that if we are going to consider layering additional policy priorities and additional costs, we really need cost containment mechanisms. And so, while the general concepts of cost containment and costs were talked about, I just want to be clear that in the stakeholder process, these specific cost containment mechanisms were not discussed. So they were raised in the draft report, and so there was opportunity for feedback on them, but they weren't like a whole part of the stakeholder process or developed collectively. They were the department put these out here as ideas for cost containment in response to the theme of needing to pay attention to costs.
I guess I just want to raise again the overall question about when you're analyzing costs, there's some upward pressure by having solar renewable energy generation be paid perhaps a higher rate per kilowatt hour than might be available on the wholesale market. But then there's also the downward pressure on costs by avoiding other costs, transmission costs, or new generation required, or purchasing power at peak times. So I just want to raise that again and be sure that we're accounting for those downward pressures on costs as well.
Yeah, so this is cost to ratepayers in this context, and so thank you for that clarification. But I'm gonna So, in order to meet our tier two, you could either get a utility that solicits a solar project, maybe a 5 megawatt project, and it gets all of those transmission benefits. It gets, tier two sets the pace of renewable energy. Now we're saying we want a specific type of tier two. And so that's the comparison. It's not it's not a comparison versus solar. I'll just use solar because that's the most likely resource here. It's not solar versus nothing or solar versus fossil fuel. It is community solar versus other solar, other procured solar. And so you get those, you're getting the same or similar benefits, or maybe more if, bigger, you may be able to design it differently or put in a location. So that's really the comparison that we're talking about here.
Okay, well, then that seems like that really gives utilities an incentive to participate in this, and actually it seems like it would make those costs of this kind of solar look pretty good cost wise compared to other tier two. Seems like on the face of it.
Perhaps I still think so. I think the idea is that in order to deliver benefits to a specific community, it's likely going to be higher cost. And I say likely because that may not be the case if the bonus investment tax credit sticks around and there's certain projects that actually get that federal incentive. You could actually have lower costs than procuring solar without that tax credit. And then with that, you're delivering that bonus tax credit is meant for low income communities. So you're hitting one of the types of communities that we actually are targeting here in this program. So it's not a definite, but absent that, then there are additional Vermont ratepayer costs for delivering a benefit to a specific community.
I just follow up with this, but the utility is going to be finding the location or and defining the community. Right? Who's what kind of affinity group defines a community?
That is what the Public Utility Commission process is structured to
They would define that.
to defining the eligible communities. Yeah.
And I think in a broad sense, ultimately the proposals that a utility receives would detail this is the community that this project will benefit, whether that's a specific affordable housing development, whether it's a manufactured home community, whether it's a broad array of low-income Vermonters in a service territory, but the proposals themselves would get to that level of detail. And I think, to your point, we've proposed that the evaluation criteria consider things like where is the project located within the service territory as one of the locations, what's the generation profile. So it's trying to bake some of those considerations into the project itself. And then I think the recommendations TJ's too thinking about, in addition, how can we ensure that we're continuing to be mindful of costs and ultimately affordability, which we heard, frequently was a high concern when we did engagement on this. So I think we're trying to come at it from a number of different ways, whether that's through intentional program design, but also thinking about where there's space to be more efficient in the way our programs run ultimately.
Okay, thank you.
I want to take just one sec. So we had invited Senator Purchlick to join us and testify about the Clean Energy Development Fund. Senator Purchlick, are you in a hurry?
No.
Do you need to get back to your probes?
No.
Do you mind if we finish our testimony about Reefer C?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, great.
Our committee got ended early.
Super. All right. Thanks for joining us. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have to get back to a probe. So, okay.
Transportation.
Sorry.
Right. So you've heard me talk about some of these, I think, already, and really probably the proper time to talk about these is when we walk through H289. These are contained in H289, but wanted to raise them here they are in the report as recommendations, and so didn't leave it out of our presentation today. There's four things here. I'll start at the bottom actually, in terms of considering a clean energy standard that recognizes nuclear as a carbon-free electricity source and the contracts that Vermont utilities already have for the resource. Our 100% renewable energy standard requires our utilities starting in 2030 to purchase renewable energy credits from existing resources like Hydro-Quebec or some of the Connecticut River dams or other existing resources that in order to show that they're 100% renewable. The concept here is that nuclear is clean as the Global Warming Solutions Act counts it and the greenhouse gas inventory. And so those costs to kind of cover that nuclear portion of the portfolio are additional costs. And what I think is a low estimate of that is we have about 1 million megawatt hours that are contracted or owned by our utilities. The current price is around $4 a megawatt hour, so $4 million per year. We actually see that market for those renewable energy credits tightening over the next 10 years. So, just saying 4 million a year is probably a low estimate of the cost. And so the cost savings of going to a clean energy standard. The other pieces here on the transmission and distribution scale, there are, as we get greater penetrations of renewable energy in state, there is the potential for additional costs. And as the grid gets constrained, there's not, in certain areas of the state, there's not enough generation, there's not enough headroom for the generation to kind of get the power out. these are not reliability issues, right? If a project is proposed and it's a reliability concern, it will not get interconnected without an upgrade. Those upgrades cost money though. But they're economic issues, and I can go into a lot more detail, I think another time, on kind of the mechanics of why that creates economic issues for our utilities. And then the last one is lowering the alternative compliance payment bucket. The ACP is effectively a cap on the price that we're willing to pay for our renewable energy, the price above market that we're willing to pay. Vermont's ACP is substantially higher than the other leading states in the region for tier 2. And lowering that protects against potential increases in costs. That these latter two that I've talked about, or three really, are not necessarily immediate cost savings, where the clean energy standard is more of a tangible, but the latter ones protect against the risks of other costs happening, that kind of unintended consequences of potential high generation.
To the left and to the right.
And how is the ATP set now? Is it set by the commission?
It was set by statute,
It's set by statute.
and it increases with inflation. So Vermont's ACP is around $73 or $75 a megawatt hour.
76.35.
Thank you. 76.35. And it had last year's number here. So $76, around $76.35, somewhere around there. And it just in context, Massachusetts revised their ACP down to $40 a megawatt hour in 2023. Connecticut, after 2021, reduced theirs to $40 a megawatt hour. Maine in 2020 set it to $50 a megawatt hour, not increasing by inflation. So context, like, when we have early in program days, it made sense to have a broader, higher alternative compliance payment as we kind of get programs going, see how the projects are going. These other states have recognized now it's time to we can ratchet that down and lower upside risk of programs.
It's probably in the footnotes here somewhere, but do you know when that was set in statute?
It was set in statute in the original renewable energy standard in 2015. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not going to write the check. It was 56 or 156.
Okay.
You answered my question, or I wanted to know what the other states' ACPs were.
Hey, Victoria.
Yeah, and I'm just recalling, we worked on that last session. We learned that nobody had ever actually paid an ACP.
That's mostly correct. There was an administrative
Very small.
issue once for a $10 ACP.
Yeah. So you're anticipating that there could be more pressure and we should be worried? Or like, why is it, what are you seeing in terms of risk for us with a past like that, not having ever used?
Right, that there could be additional pressure on costs, and we think we should limit the upside cost risk at a lower spot than we are now.
Because of transmission
Because of transmission and distribution, but also because of just cost pressures generally. And so this, depending on what happens federally, we could see more cost pressures. Renewable energy resources.
Could you remind me where that money goes if it when it collected?
It goes to the Clean Energy Development Fund. And actually, there was a change in last year's legislation. It goes to the Clean Energy Development Fund, but it is specifically to be used in the utility territory that it was collected from. So
If we could wrap at 11:40, that was a great segue. Now, I feel like I need to make sure we allow time for Senator Kirkland. So as you know,
Yeah.
we can always have you back.
Yes.
Rep. Campbell.
Quick question. Do we have a sense of the range of what the actual cost is per megawatt hour? I guess these are all in contracts with generators.
Right. So the ACP is really the above market cost. So you need to subtract out the value of the generator. So you think energy market value, capacity market value. So we've seen purchase power agreements, anywhere from like the $78 range recently up to $140 recently for long-term purchase power agreements. And so that you don't measure that number by the ACP isn't compared against that number. It is compared against the difference between that number, and all of the value that the project provides, like the avoided
We'll
costs.
have to go down that rabbit hole another time, I guess. Thanks.
So lowering the ACP, would you expect that we would then see more utilization of the ACP? And meeting the requirements?
There's potential for that, but there's more potential for it, right? It makes it more likely than where it is now. But I think we would still see projects that were underneath the ACP.
Just trying to go the next step. If we see more utilization of the HCP, which goes to the Clean Energy Development Fund, and it's not quite clicking in my head yet.
And then it's
What is
used
the
to
overall
promote
effect?
more renewable energy, but like I started with, I guess it's a cost containment mechanism. So it doesn't, it's a cost cap on what we're willing to pay. So if, in a worst case scenario, even now in a worst case scenario, we could see projects get really expensive and we don't, they don't qualify under the ACP, and utilities need to pay that alternative compliance payment instead of supporting projects.
Thanks.
Okay, 5 minutes.
It's funny, this is our last content slide, and TJ and I are like, there's no way we'll spend an hour on 18 slides, but here we are.
Clarify.
Okay.
I said that we would spend an hour easily.
Wow.
I have one.
So obviously we wanted to focus on those first two recommendations because they address current bills that are before your committee, and these other two didn't point towards immediate legislative action specifically, but did want to recognize that they fill kind of the suite of recommendations in the report. The first just being around taking a holistic look at the net metering program through a PUC proceeding. Act 179 ended group net metering and left sort of the regular net metering as is. And we talk about how we've heard that a more holistic approach to the program would be to look at net metering as a whole, whether that's to modernize it, review and modernize it, really to reflect where Vermont is in terms of distributed generation in the state. This would follow other states, both in and outside of our region, thinking about how to compensate net metering systems writ large going forward, how to reconfigure the program to better address other policy objectives we have now, whether that's electrification or more equitable outcomes, and then would also just generally be consistent with intent of the PUC. And then the last recommendation, to Representative Klippner's question right at the outset, we heard in the sort of objectives set before us in developing a successor program that one of the objectives should be encouraging electrification and building decarbonization. And we certainly heard through the process from affordable housers, and anecdotally have heard about this from other communities like municipalities, that electrifying our buildings does create additional cost pressures, especially in natural gas territory, whether that is through additional equipment or ongoing operations and maintenance. And we recognize that those are barriers they're facing. But ultimately felt that the best way for a successor program specific to supporting access to community solar to support electrification is by mitigating upward rate pressure. And so we have tried to do that in the recommendations we put forward. And in the report, we tee up alternative program ideas that could be used to very more specifically target the supporting the financial barriers to electrification, whether that's rate design, whether that's looking at efficiency programs or other incentive support that we have. So that was really the rationale, of just splitting that objective off into a more targeted program area instead of including it with a successive program. I won't go through this. We do talk about what else is in the report here, context, data on current inequity for the frontline and impacted communities we identified. And yeah, we're happy to address questions as they come up.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time and this testimony. It's really helpful. Yeah, and we will be in touch.
This is great.
Oh,
Also,
thank you.
along with the report. Really awesome.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for being so patient. Senator Pertollet. Appreciate your being willing to hang around. So.
Chair. They got a chair with you?
Yes, and returning it to where it
Till he
was.
gets his mug.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, they get ransom. I get around my bag, yeah.
Yeah, we're actually getting through our morning's testimony on time. This is great. Thanks for your flexibility.
Yeah.
All right. So Senator Pertollet, for the record.
Yeah, so for the record, I'm Senator Andrew Pertchik. I represent the Washington District. Although my testimony today is not Senator Pertchik,
Right.
Director of the Clean Energy Development Fund, although the department's even switching that role as the fund is changing. Since 2009, I've been the Director of the Clean Energy Development Fund. I used to come to this committee every day during Chairman Doss's and Chairman Klein's tenure and give an hour report on the Clean Energy Development Fund every year. And so we still issue a report. It's up on our website. I didn't bring that in or think of doing a formal slide presentation on the fund.
Fine.
But you just want me to dive into.
We do not really know what the fund is.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're starting at, new committee, we're starting at kind of 101. So thought it'd be great to hear about the fund and when it was established and how it works and how it gets its revenue and the whole deal.
Yeah, so the Clean Energy Development Fund was started, I think, in 2005 or 6, something like that. But there was a big change when we made a deal with Vermont Yankee about their dry cast storages, the storage that they were doing in dry cast on the site. And I think that was $625,000 a quarter per cast that they were going to pay the state. And that was going to go into the Clean Energy Development Fund. This was during Gay Simon, was the speaker at the time. So the fund had been established, but there wasn't really any money into it. It was basically just kind of a staff of the department would run it. They had an advisory group that helped advise I can't remember where the money, maybe it was some federal, I can't remember where the money was before that. So the dry casks, and then there was when Entergy bought Vermont Yankee from the Vermont Utilities, there was a big debate about there should be something for renewables in that deal. There's a lot of people that wanted to basically create the Clean Energy Development Fund and extract some money from that change of ownership. That effort didn't succeed at the PUC. The PUC disagreed with that proposal that a lot of the energy groups, environmental groups proposed. But then when Entergy came forward and wanted to do an uprate, they wanted to increase the power of Vermont Yankee. That time of basically a fee for the Clean Energy Development Fund was established to that 20%. So any of the revenue they had of that increase of 20%, portion of that came to the Clean Energy Development Fund. So there was a time when I got there in 2009, they restructured the board. They created a formal board that hired me as executive director. I worked for the board, not for the commissioner of the Department of Public Service. So the time the legislature wanted it kind of step removed from the politics of the commissioner and of being appointed by the governor. That switched later on, but at that time when I got there, it was like $4 to $7 million a year between the dry cast payments and the uprate payments that was coming with the Clean Energy Development Fund. And basically the board decided how all that $4 to $7 million was spent per year. We basically have done incentives over the years of every kind of renewable energy technology that there is. We had a big solar program years ago trying to ramp up the solar industry in Vermont. We've done micro hydro. We've done small wind projects. We've done some not large wind projects, but kind of support large wind before there was any large wind in Vermont, like mapping and resource evaluation and things like that. So over those years, from 2010, 2009, when I got there till 2015, we were spending that $4 to $7 million a year on all sorts of renewable energy generation. And that the main goal is to increase the renewable generation in the state, with some other underlying goals of like making it more affordable, supporting the economic development aspect of the renewable energy industry, supporting low income or the vulnerable Vermonters. So there's some of those underlying goals, but the main goal is just increase generation of renewable energy. The law was changed at one point to include thermal energy, because before originally it's just electricity. And so we've also done a lot on wood energy for thermal purposes, so theaters, and that's basically the only thing we do now. As you know, the Vermont Yankee is no longer in operation. Building's now been torn down. So in 2014, they stopped making payments to the state of that dry cask and the uprate payment. They said, we're going to shut it down. We're not going to pay. There was a disagreement between the state about how much they owed and should they keep paying for the dry cask because they're still there. The Shumlin administration and the Vermont Yankee Entergy made a deal. Basically, they'd give us one last payment and we would agree that everything is settled. So the last payment was $5.2 million in fiscal year 2015. And half of that, because of advocacy from folks from Windham County, had to be spent in for the benefit of Windham County because of the economic impact of closing the plant, losing those good paying jobs. So that's kind of money we've been spending. So since then, we haven't had any new appropriations into the fund other than we used to have a loan program. So the loans were slowly getting paid back. And I think every once in a while we did get like $100,000 for some specific thing, but we basically just been spending down that money that we had, plus the loans that have come back. And then my staff time, I'm the only staff person, so I've just been working also on department stuff. So for a while, TJ was my boss. Now there's a new different division, Melissa Bailey, if you ever had come in, it's within Melissa's state energy office, working on other state grants. So one of the reasons I ran for office is because the job was likely going to end because the money was ending. Vermont Yankee was not spending any money. During the Shumlin administration, there was some interest of finding a different source of money. Someone at one point proposed to do break-off tickets, if you know what those are.
No.
To fund the Clean Energy Development Fund.
What are break-off tickets?
Break-off tickets are like American Legion and some other fundraisers. You break up these little things, and they're like little lottery cards.
Oh,
You open the tabs.
Yeah.
And see if you're a winner.
oh, okay.
So
All
for
right.
the record, it's amazing what a grown man will pay for it.
Yeah.
That's a small step up from pie sales.
Yeah, it's a fundraiser,
Alright.
so people objected to getting a tax on their fundraising. That didn't go anywhere. So none of the efforts to find a sustainable funding source for the Clean Energy Development Fund materialized. So we're going to run aground. So I thought I should do something else. So I ran for office, and then just been only doing part-time for the fund, which has kind of let the money go longer because they don't have to pay me for those months that I'm not there. And we got the last loan paid back last year. So I think we're down to like $150,000 or something. Like the fund is getting down there. There's still a little bit of money left in Windham County, and that money that we thought was going to go to some large wood projects. I want to say it's like $100,000 left that we're trying to do some residential pellet projects. Brett Wiki came to the board, the Clean Energy Development Board recently, and was pitching some other projects to use that money. But we're basically trying to get the last of that money out. And my role is going to switch to the Solar for All program, which you heard from Melissa this morning. So I'll be working on that as the fund runs out. The Sunset Commission, I think that's what we called it.
Yeah.
was created. They look at through all the boards. So they've looked at the Clean Energy Development Board. This was, I think, 2 years ago, 2015, I could look it up, but Senator White was the leader of that commission. And they got to the Clean Energy Development Fund and they basically said, you need to have a board if you're not going to have any money. And the board said, well, probably not. And they're not. So there is a cost of the per diems. Most of the board members never submit their form. So I don't think we've paid a board member per diem since COVID because most of them are remote, or if they come, they don't put in their fee. So they basically said that the board shall be sunset at the end of fiscal year 2027. Originally, they were going to do it earlier. The department and the board made a request to extend it to 2027 because the one hope of funding for the Clean Energy Development Fund was the TDI transmission project that was going to go under Lake Champlain. This is to bring Canadian power under Lake Champlain and then cross over to New Haven and then down to the Connecticut, Massachusetts market. There was a deal in there that the Clean Energy Development Fund would get paid $5 million a year for the 20 years as part of that. So if that project keeps getting postponed or said it's not going to happen or not winning contracts. But there was still 2 years ago when we were talking about sunsetting it, there was still some hope that maybe it would still happen. There's still an outside chance it would happen. But some of those things that the CPG would have to be renewed. I'm not sure if all the deals would still be pertinent. But we said we should know by 2027 whether there's going to be that funding for the fund. And so we said sunset it in 2027. And then it would the fund would still be there. Like you just learned, the ACP payments would go there. So there's some other statutory roles that the fund has like that. So they want to keep it there, but it would just really go back to the old setup where there's maybe an advisory board, or you wouldn't even have an advisory board. You would the department staff would do it under the office of the commissioner.
Okay, so the board sunsetting, the fund is almost dwindled to nothing, but we'll hang on to the fund. And if there becomes a regular source of revenue for it, the DPS will oversee that.
Yeah, the shell will be there in case something like the TDI project or something else happens. Somebody wants to build a new nuclear power plant and we want to make a deal. Like that's the structure will be there for whatever funding is available. And the legislature did do that in ARPA. There was some $5 million of ARPA. They said, we're going to give that to the Clean Energy Development Fund to decide. So the board got to decide this $5 million fund with ARPA money. But so if the legislature sees a need to give something to a different, and not to the department for whatever reason, but to the board, then that structure would be there.
Okay.
So great. It's a great overview. Can you tell us anything about your role with Solar for All? How that's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, we're still just kind of figuring it out, and it's hard because I only get to work on it 1 day a week. We have, as Melissa probably told you, we have another person that's full time, and he's a sharp guy, but he's new to the solar sector and new to state government, and he's just one person, so he gets overwhelmed pretty quickly. So I think, it's state government, it's federal government regulations, trying to get everything up and running. I think once we get up and running, it'll be successful and move smoothly. But it's just getting all the contracts and.
So you really haven't worked on it yet.
I've been working on it since last September.
Okay.
So I helped finalize the work plan that was submitted to the EPA. We've been back and forth on the EPA on the work plan, and now just trying to move the processes forward on sub-grants and contracts.
Yeah. So it's very much unlisted.
Yeah. I mean, if we had more people, of course, it would go quicker, but we have the people. I think we have the right amount of people once it gets up and running, but it's just hard. There's a little bottleneck at this point.
Just to kind of, as an aside, when we built the Vermont Community Broadband Board, we looked at the model.
Right.
That you mentioned to the fund. Okay. Something within the agency, but sort of separate.
Yeah. the way it's set up now, the board and the commissioner kind of have veto power over each other. The department can propose things to the board and the board can either say yes or no. Or the board can propose things to the department and the department can say yes or no. And that's how it's been kind of a partnership. Usually the department, because they have staff and the board doesn't, makes a proposal. The board either says that's fine or asks questions or can you change this, and it's a back and forth.
So it's a collaboration and it works well.
I think so. Yeah, I think sometimes different commissioners haven't liked that they have to get approval from the board,
Yeah.
you know, but they're not used to that. But it's worked because they have not been obstinate. They've been, everybody's been trying to work together. That's it. So that's the story on the clean energy development.
Great, thanks, Senator.
Nice.
Appreciate you joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Glad to be back up in the.
yeah, right.